Gracious Heavenly Father, God, I just pray that you go before us into the lives of these children that are going to gather on this campus to hear the name of Jesus. Some of them that is not a name that is spoken of very often in their homes or not spoken of very kindly in their homes. God, I pray that this would be a safe space where the Spirit can move and it be a formative week for these young minds. Father, I pray for our volunteers and our staff and all of those who are playing a part in making this ministry happen this week, that you go before us, you iron out the kinks, that you guide us in all that we say and do. And God, I pray that we could glorify you. But Father, this morning I pray that you would give me the words to speak and open up the ears and the hearts of those who need to hear this particular message today. We pray this in your Son's precious and holy name. And all God's people said, what were the good old days for you? If you had to think about it, when is the period in your life that you wish you could go back and repeat? I know that there is something that's coming to your mind. For me, I very distinctly know what comes to mind. So Amy and I have been married for 15 years. Now, that's long enough to have been through some stuff, but not nearly as long as many of you. I get that. But for us, those first 3 years of marriage were interesting. We got married after my first year of seminary. So I moved back from Kentucky, back to Mississippi, where we're both from. We got married, and then we moved her and the two girls up to Kentucky so I could finish up the next 3 years at Asbury Theological Seminary. And so for the first 3 years of our marriage, I was in graduate school, and we were broke. Oh my goodness. We were so broke. And we lived in campus housing at the time, and life was hard. I was in my mid-20s, newlywed with two new stepdaughters, trying to figure out how to do life. And I was working on campus for minimum wage at 10 hours a week. Amy's job she was struggling with because all the seminary spouses, the student spouses, were all vying for a handful of jobs in rural Kentucky. So it was difficult. The budget was tight, and we were really lonely. We didn't have family or friends there. It was just the four of us. There were so many tears shed those first 3 years. But looking back on it, yeah, it was a really difficult time, but man, we did everything together. We took the girls on a regular basis to the Dollar Theater that was there in Lexington, which is about 20 minutes away. And so the tickets were $1, the popcorn was $2, and so for $10 I could take the whole family. Yeah, the movie had been out for 3 months, but we didn't care because we could do that. I took Ava and Connor yesterday to go see Superman. Let me tell you, it was more than $10. By far. Don't look at the bank statement, Amy. We went to the mall almost every weekend. Not that we could afford to shop there, but just literally to dream about what life could be. We went hiking on a regular basis because hiking was free, and we liked free. We watched a lot of TV shows and movies and played games in our super small living room because that was what was available to us. I took Sundays off from school and from work because I made a commitment to spend it with the family. And like those times, we came together. And yes, it was a profoundly difficult season of life. But yet, there was so much beauty and formation that happened during it. I wouldn't trade those 3 years for anything. I know you've been through similar seasons of life. In fact, I know you've been through very difficult seasons in your life. Seasons in which you have begged God for them to come to an end. Because isn't that what happens when you're going through a really difficult time? You're just like, dear God, please let what I am going through right now stop. We all do that. Yet, it's when we look back on those times that we realize it was in those difficult seasons we became who we are now. Those are the times that form us the most. And it's in hindsight that you can see the beauty for what it was. Now, we are into week 4 of our sermon series on the book of Ecclesiastes. If you're just joining us, the book of Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon, or at least it's the wisdom of King Solomon. We think somebody else actually penned it. It's the wisdom of Solomon around the meaning of life. And we started off a few weeks ago with chapter 1, verse 1, where right out of the gate, Solomon declares that everything is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. When you put life in perspective of eternity, all of the things that we work for and worry about are just like vapor. It's here one minute and then dissipated and completely gone the next. And so with this epiphany, because wisdom comes with heaviness, with this epiphany that led to so much heaviness, he's like, well, if everything is meaningless, then I'll try to find some gratification out of just living my life for pleasure. And so by chapter 2, he gives himself fully over to pleasure. He doesn't deny himself anything his heart desires, he says. And what he discovered is that too much of a good thing is actually not a good thing. That to live your life for only fun is actually pretty meaningless too. And so by the end of chapter 2, he kind of swings the pendulum the other direction. He gives himself fully over to work. He pours himself into doing as much as he can to gain as much as he can, only to get the new epiphany that he works so hard to obtain so much, only to have somebody else reap the benefits of all of his labor. And he says, well then, what's the point to that? Now, I will tell you that each week I have skipped ahead to the very last chapter of Ecclesiastes to give us the full perspective, because we're taking this a bite at a time. I'm pulling us to the very end, to his conclusion. The conclusion that I've pointed out that Solomon arrives at is this, that the thing that matters most in life is who you become with God. Because friends, you have a soul. And your soul, it matters. The state of your soul, meaning your relationship with God, is the only thing that carries over from this life into the next. So when you drop things into its full perspective, your soul in its state is the only thing that truly matters. And because of that, Solomon gives us a perspective on how we should spend our time. Now, Solomon is not saying that we should never work. That's improbable. You have to work. Solomon isn't saying you should not enjoy the finer things in life, to enjoy pleasure. Pleasure has its proper place and time, given the right context. But what he is saying is that from an eternal perspective, the thing that matters most is not what you do in this life. It's who you become. And who you become is directly impacted by the seasons of life that you live through. Life comes in seasons. We inherently know this because we often refer to things using the language of seasons. How many times have we said, man, I'm just going through a difficult season of life right now? Or I'm transitioning from one season of life into another. That is in our vernacular, right? But something I need you to understand is that the seasons of life that you live through are largely out of your control. You don't control the season of life that you are in right now. Because life is not a game show. I'm going to take blessed and prosperous for 500, Alex. That's not how this works. You don't get to choose it. It's not Jeopardy. You don't choose the season of life that you're in. However, you do get to choose who you become in the midst of it. You make choices about yourself and who you become in the season that you find yourself in. But I also need you to understand, you don't get to choose who everybody else becomes in their seasons. And that's difficult for some of us to hear. Now, friends, I see the prayer requests that come through our website every single day. Just about every day we get new prayer requests in. Some are anonymous, some we know who they are, and we can pray specifically for them. But between that and the phone calls and the texts and the Facebook messages and people pulling me aside on a Sunday morning or a Thursday night, I get to hear what it is some of you are going through, the struggles that you're in, the seasons of life you're in. I don't know individually what each one of you is going through and what season you are in right now, but I have a pretty good sense of where we are as a congregation. You know, some of us are in the throes of raising kids. You're in that season of life. And it's busy, and it's tiring, and it's worrisome, and there's not a lot of sleep. And the days are long, but yet it all feels like a blur. And for those of you who have been through that season, you know, if you blink, you'll miss it, right? And then some of us, we're in a season of caregiving. Whether it's with an aging parent or an aging spouse, their health has gotten to the place where it is taking all of your time and attention and energy. And dealing with an aging spouse or parent is much different than dealing with going through the raising kids stage, because raising kids, you're on the front end of a life, and now you find yourself on the back end of a life, and with that comes a whole lot of emotions, and for some of us, it has taken years to process those emotions. So it is hard. Some of us are in a season of difficulty within our marriage. Things have grown stagnant, tempers flare readily. You started off as best friends, you moved on to lovers, and now you have found yourself in the season of being like the odd couple, as dysfunctional roommates. And you don't know how you got there. It's not life-giving anymore, this relationship. Instead, you don't know how to reinvigorate that spark. Some of us are in a season of singleness. Whether it's you've not found the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, or the person you have spent your life with is no longer with you. And there is an aching pain to loneliness that it's hard to shake. Some of us are in a season of health issues. The diagnosis just doesn't seem to be getting better, and the doctor's visits and the medical bills just keep stacking up, and you have found yourself sick and tired of being sick and tired. And some of us are in a season of transitions. Maybe the kids have moved out. Maybe the job and the career has shifted. Maybe your new normal is no longer normal anymore, and you're trying to figure out what it looks like to go from one season into the next, and you're all kinds of discombobulated. There are any number of seasons of life that you can find yourself in. Some, admittedly, are better and easier than others, but each season of life has its own challenges. And you don't get to choose the season. You rarely even get to control when the season begins or when the season ends. You only get to control who you are in the midst of it. Solomon makes this observation about life in chapter 3. It's actually one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture. Look with me. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. I've used that passage at a lot of people's funerals because it truly is life. You know, there's a time for babies to be born and a time for loved ones to die. There's a time for putting down roots and a time for pulling them up and moving on. There's a time to go on the offensive and there's a time to gather back and lick your wounds. There's a time for sadness and a time for laughter. You get the picture. But I love the next few observations of Solomon that often get overlooked for the sake of the beautiful poetic nature of that first part. He says, God has made everything beautiful in its time. Friends, all seasons have their challenges and difficulties when you're in them. Yet it's looking back on them that you see the beauty that God has created from it. Now, rarely do you see it when you're in the midst of it. When you're in the midst of hardship, you are like locked in and you can't see the bigger picture. It's only after you've gone through it that you can look back and see how far you've come and how much God has done within you. Now, to be clear, nowhere in this passage does Solomon say that you have to appreciate the season of life that you're in right now. Because let's face it, some seasons of life are heart-wrenching. They're painful. He does, however, say that God makes everything beautiful in his time. I think what that means is that ultimately, everything that you've gone through, it gets redeemed. Now, in 15 years of marriage, we've been through some hellish seasons of life. Moments in time that I have no nostalgia for and would never want to repeat. But I've seen beauty come from ashes when God took the difficulties and made something good out of them. And I have found myself to be a very different person because of the difficult seasons of life that I have gone through. Who are you becoming in the midst of your most challenging times? I need you to ponder that this morning. Not what did you do, but who did you become? And then Solomon says this. He says, God has set eternity in the human heart. I think that this is a poetic way of saying that God has given you a soul, and your soul is meant to endure. Seasons of life, they come and they go. Yet God has given you a gift that is meant to traverse the good and the bad. So the question is, what will you do with your soul? Will the good times lead your soul to become lazy and undisciplined? Will the difficult times lead your soul to become bitter and shrink back? Will your soul become more rooted in Jesus, or will it only blame Jesus for the difficulties? There have been times that I have blamed Jesus for my difficult seasons that I found myself in. Now, I firmly believe that you don't know the meaning of pain until you fall in love. Are you with me? There is a level of vulnerability that comes from falling in love with somebody. And there is a pain that comes from that you cannot describe to somebody until they experience it for themselves. About 2 months into our marriage, I discovered what pain was like. Now, the transition from Mississippi to Kentucky was very difficult on Amy. I had been there for a year. I had met people, but she was new and this was unfamiliar and we're trying to figure out how to do life. Now, They offered a class specifically designed for spouses of seminary students to take. It was a spiritual formation class. Everybody I knew who had taken it had raved about it. And so I asked Amy, she hesitantly agreed to sign up and take the class. Well, she was unfamiliar with the layout of the seminary at the time, and so I offered to accompany her to the first night of the class to help her find the room that it was in. So she took her car, I took my car. I was going to go home and be with the kids. Well, we get there, and she's been hesitant all the way through. We get up to the door of the classroom. Everybody's seated inside. The class is about to start, and she just stops in her tracks. She said, I can't do this. I said, what do you mean you can't do this? She said, I can't do this. I cannot go through with this. Yeah, we're kind of standing outside the door. You got to go in. She said, I'm not doing this. Now, what she was talking about, she just wasn't ready. She wasn't ready. She didn't know these people. She wasn't ready to take this spiritual journey on this class at that moment. I get it. Now, not then. Turns out she was having a panic attack in that moment, but all I could think of was, I need you to take this class. Why are you not taking this class? I want you to take this class. I want you to be who I need you to be in this season of life that we are in. But what did I say earlier? You only control who you become in the season of life that you're in, not who everybody else is. It's taken me a minute to figure that out, okay? She didn't go in. And I'm upset. I'm embarrassed. Like, literally, the people are sitting in the class and they can see us arguing. She says, I'm not doing it. She had her car keys, I had mine. She got in her car and she took off. And I was upset and embarrassed. And so I got in my car and I took off. And we drove from Little Wilmore, Kentucky. Both of us took off into the city of Lexington for the next several hours, angry and upset. I don't know where she ended up. I know I ended up in the parking lot of the church we were attending at the time. I was in a parking lot all by myself, just me and God, and I let God have it. You ever let God have it? I tell people, he can take it. He's wearing his big boy britches. He can take whatever it is you have to say. I had a lot to say that night. I was so upset. God, why? Why are you allowing me to go through such a difficult season of life? The first 3 months of marriage, nothing about it has been easy. Why would you let me go through so much pain? Why would you lead us into a place where none of this seems to be working? Well, I eventually made it back to the apartment. She did too. The kids were already in bed. And we had a heart-to-heart talk that night. It was a difficult conversation. Things were said, feelings were felt. We're 3 months into our marriage, and I'm wondering, are we going to make it another 3 months? But friends, what I've come to realize, what do you do in the midst of the difficult seasons? Who do you become? God is faithful no matter what it is you're going through. God meets you in the midst of the difficulties, no matter what they are. If you keep leaning into him and you focus on who you become with him, God can take even the hardest situations and cause some beauty to come from that. And it's hard to be aware of it in the moment. But it's in hindsight that you see what God gets you through and the progress that you've made. 3 years later, my last year of seminary, Amy signed up for that class yet again. This time I took it with her. We took it together. And it became formative and laid a groundwork for the next season of life that we entered, which was pastoral ministry. And 15 years later, she walked step for step with me in this life of ministry that we've been called into. And like in that parking lot 15 years ago, I never could have foreseen that happening. Those 3 years were immensely difficult, but I have got so many fond memories of that because of who we became through them. Friends, you don't always control the season of life you find yourself in. You only control who you become in the midst of it. So will you become somebody who grows closer to Jesus? Or will you be somebody who pulls further away?